On a bitter cold January morning in 1990, deep in the secluded woods of Daviess County, Kentucky, a discovery would launch one of the most perplexing investigations in the state's history. A male body, brutally beaten, shot multiple times, and methodically mutilated, would remain nameless for decades, setting off a chain of events that would devastate not one, but two families in their search for answers. Before we dive deeper into this haunting story, take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing these important cold cases and potentially bring closure to families still searching for answers. The victim lay there, stripped of both clothing and identity. The killer had gone to extraordinary lengths to prevent identification, removing the hands and feet, beating the face beyond recognition. 6 bullet wounds told a story of excessive violence, but they weren't the only injuries. The level of brutality suggested this wasn't just a murder, it was a message. Local law enforcement was stumped. With no identification and no missing persons matching the description in the immediate area, the case quickly went cold. The victim became known simply as the Daviess County John Doe, one more unnamed face in America's growing gallery of unidentified victims. If you're finding this story compelling, please hit that like button. Every like helps spread awareness about these unsolved cases. For 17 years, the victim remained nameless. But in 2007, investigators thought they'd finally cracked the case. Their attention turned to a teenage boy who had vanished without a trace nearly 3 decades earlier, Scott Michael Morris. Scott was just 14 years old when he disappeared from Indianapolis, Indiana, in 1978. His family had spent decades wondering what happened to their son, their brother, their nephew. When Kentucky investigators approached them with what they believed was a match, it seemed their agonizing wait for answers might finally be over. The Morris family began planning a funeral. They believed they could finally lay their loved one to rest. But fate had a cruel twist in store, one that would shake two families to their core. Quick reminder to our viewers, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss what happens next in this incredible story. Law enforcement was confident in their identification. The circumstances seemed to align, and the Morris family had lived with uncertainty for so long that they were ready to accept closure in any form. But something wasn't sitting right with some investigators. In 2010, they decided to conduct DNA testing to confirm the identification conclusively. The results would shatter everything they thought they knew about the case. The DNA showed no genetic connection to the Morris family whatsoever. The Morris family's hopes were crushed. Not only had they not found Scott, but they were back to square one, their questions about their missing loved one still unanswered. Meanwhile, the true identity of the Daviess County John Doe remained a mystery. If you're as invested in this story as we are, make sure to like and subscribe. Your engagement helps us bring attention to cold cases like this one. Years passed. Advanced DNA testing and genealogical research continued. Finally, in April 2024, after 34 years of mystery, the victim received his name back. He was William Dennis Mathews, a 37-year-old former resident of Louisville, Kentucky. The identification of William Mathews answered one question, but opened the door to countless others. Who would want him dead? Why was the murder so brutal? And perhaps most importantly, why go to such extreme lengths to hide his identity? If you just joined us and haven't seen part 1 of this story, make sure to check it out and hit that subscribe button to stay updated on similar true crime cases. William Mathews was 37 years old at the time of his death, a former resident of Louisville, Kentucky. The level of violence in his murder suggested this wasn't a random act. The killer or killers had taken extraordinary measures. The removal of hands and feet, the multiple gunshot wounds, the severe beating that left his face unrecognizable, all pointed to a premeditated act of extreme violence. The investigation took an interesting turn when authorities began exploring a possible connection to James Cable, a notorious figure who had terrorized Kentucky during the 1980s. However, this lead presented its own complications. Cable's confirmed victims had all been female, making the connection to Matthews's case tentative at best. Before we continue with this shocking revelation, take a moment to like this video if you find these true crime investigations as fascinating as we do. Your support helps us bring more attention to cold cases like this one. The brutal nature of the crime suggested possible sexual assault, adding another layer to this already complex case. The location where the body was found, a remote wooded area in Daviess County, indicated the killer was familiar with the area. This wasn't a randomly chosen dump site, it was selected with purpose. Meanwhile, the case of Scott Morris, the 14-year-old boy from Indianapolis who disappeared in 1978, remains unsolved. The misidentification in 2007 had given his family false hope, only to plunge them back into uncertainty when DNA testing revealed the truth in 2010. His disappearance continues to haunt investigators and family members alike. If you're finding value in these detailed cold case investigations, please consider subscribing to our channel. Every subscriber helps us reach more people who might have information about these unsolved cases. Today, both cases remain active investigations. The identification of William Mathews has given investigators new avenues to explore, but many questions remain unanswered. Who killed him? What was their motive? And why did they go to such extreme lengths to prevent his identification? As for Scott Morris, his family continues to search for answers. His disappearance at age 14 represents another tragic mystery, one that became unexpectedly intertwined with the Mathews case through a cruel twist of fate. Before we conclude this haunting tale, hit that like button if you want to see more in-depth coverage of cold cases like this one. Your engagement helps these stories reach a wider audience. If you have any information about the murder of William Mathews or the disappearance of Scott Morris, please contact your local authorities or the Kentucky State Police. Remember, even the smallest detail could be the key to solving these cases and bringing closure to two families who have waited decades for answers. The woods of Daviess County may have given up one of their secrets with the identification of William Mathews, but they still hold many more. Until all the questions are answered, until justice is served, these cases will remain a haunting reminder of the devastating impact of unsolved crimes on families and communities alike.